Ready? Okay. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the AWP 22 Conference and Book Fair in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. I'm Jenny Young-Kropp, Southwest Council Chair of the AWP Board of Directors. Here's a visual description of me. I am a short, middle-aged Korean-American woman with long brown hair, glasses, and I am wearing a burgundy dress. I also want to take this opportunity to give you a friendly reminder that AWP is still requiring all participants to wear masks in public spaces, such as this event. We are delighted to bring you this event today. Before we introduce our featured presenters, I'd like to acknowledge and thank our premier conference sponsor, Wilkes University Creative Writing. Our literary partners and sponsors allow AWP to present extraordinary literary events and help us keep our conference affordable and accessible. Please join me in thanking all of our conference sponsors and partners for their support and participation. Before we start, I do need to do some brief housekeeping. Please silence your cell phones. Remember that there is no flash photography allowed during the presentation. Respect the seats that are marked as reserved for attendees with accessibility needs. And please give our authors about 15 minutes after the presentation to get to the book signing table before you approach them to have your book signed. Lastly, we ask that you please be aware of your fellow attendees who may have disabilities and help AWP to be more accessible. Specifically, if you see a barrier to accessibility, let us know by calling or texting our accessibility hotline at 215-770-7291. Please also be aware of those with invisible disabilities and do not question someone's use of an accommodation. Thank you for your attention to all of those things, and now it is my great pleasure and honor to welcome Kyle Lucia Wu, Managing Director of Kundiman.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. Welcome to Kundiman's featured reading, Beyond Genres, a reading and discussion with K-Ming Chang, Kira Māhealani Madden, Patrick Rosal, and moderated by Jaime Barrizzo. I'm Kyle Lucia Wu, Kundiman's Managing Director, and I'm pleased to introduce today's reading. For accessibility purposes, I am a biracial Chinese American woman in my early 30s with brown hair and glasses, wearing an oversized navy suit. Thanks, Kathy. Founded in 2004, Kundiman is a literary nonprofit dedicated to nurturing generations of Asian American literature. Through online classes, mentorship programs, our annual retreat, and readings like this one, we seek to uplift the storytellers of our community and create a space where Asian Americans can explore through art the unique challenges of the diaspora. More than 250 fellows have attended our annual retreat, and those fellows have published over 290 books since Kundiman's inception, a radical transformation in the literary landscape. We have 10 regional groups stationed both across the country and internationally who host their own salons, readings, and workshops. This June, our annual retreat will resume in person for poets and fiction writers. And since the beginning of the pandemic, we've been offering online classes in fiction, nonfiction, and poetry. Many of our classes are open to all writers of color. To learn more, you can find more about us on our website at kundiman.org or on social media at kundimanforever. So today, we are really thrilled to present this reading with 4 writers very dear to Kundiman. Thank you so much to everyone at AWP for all your work organizing and for working with us as literary partners. And thank you to all of you for attending. I have the honor of introducing our moderator, and then we'll get started. Born in Toronto, Jaime Barrizzo is a poet, performer, and author of The Cumulus Effect from 4-Way Books and Tender Machines from Tupelo Press 2023. Her book of hybrid essays, Pink Noise, was a finalist for the Grey Wolf Nonfiction Prize. She is the recipient of fellowships and awards from Bennington College, the New School, Jerome Foundation, and Poets House. Recent writing appears in Poetry Magazine, Plowshares, Esquire, Iowa Review, and the Los Angeles Review of Books. She teaches writing at the Pratt Institute and Parsons School of Design and lives in New York City. Welcome, Jaime.
Thank you, Kyle, and thanks for all of you who are here today. I also want to acknowledge, the difficulties that we've all had these past 2 years, being isolated, but also growing with communities like Kundiman. As I stand here, I also want to acknowledge the fragile geopolitical situation overseas in places like Yemen, Afghanistan, and Ukraine. When other writers, artists, and journalists are migrating across borders, their freedoms at risk, I realize what a privilege and a gift it is to stand here with you today. It's really my pleasure to introduce these three brilliant multidisciplinary and artists here today. T. Kira, who taught with me at Kundiman's inaugural mentorship lab, K-Ming, whose work I've been following since she was at Sarah Lawrence, and Patrick, my fellow Filipino brother, whose work in performance and poetics has inspired countless others. Ming Cheng is a Kundiman Fellow, a Lambda Literary Award finalist, and a National Book Award Foundation 5 Under 35 honoree. She's the author of the New York Times Book Review Editor's Choice novel, Bestiary, which was longlisted for the Center for Fiction's First Novel Prize and the PEN/Faulkner Award. Her short story collection, Gods of Want, is forthcoming in 2022. T. Kira Māhealani Madden is a Chinese Kanaka Maoli writer, photographer, and amateur musician. A recipient of fellowships from the New York Foundation of Arts, Hedgebrook, Tin House, McDowell, and Yaddo, where she was awarded the Linda Collins Endowed Residency Award. She serves as the founding editor of No Tokens, a magazine of literature and art. She's the author of the 2019 New York Times Editor's Choice memoir, Long Live the Tribe of Fatherless Girls, which is now being developed as a feature film. A finalist for the National Book Critics Circle Award, Leonard Prize, and the winner of the 2021 Judith A. Markovits Lambda Literary Award, she's facilitated writing workshops for homeless and formerly incarcerated individuals and is assistant professor of English at College of Charleston. And lastly, Patrick Rosal. He currently serves as inaugural director of the Mellon-funded Institute for the Study of Global Racial Justice at Rutgers-Camden, where he's professor of English. He's the author of 5 full-length poetry collections, including The Last Thing, New and Selected Poems. He's received fellowships from the John Simon Guggenheim Foundation, National Endowment of Arts, and the Fulbright Research Scholar Program. Residencies include Civitella Ranieri, Lannan Residency, and Atlantic Center for the Arts. I want to welcome these three writers. They're going to be reading for you, and then we'll be having our conversation.
Hi, I'm K-Ming. For accessibility purposes, I'm a Taiwanese woman with shoulder-length hair. I'm wearing all black. And thank you so much, Kundiman, for inviting me, and Jaime for the intro. This is also my first time being mic'd, so I feel like a pop star. It's very exciting for me. So I'll be reading a flash story called Momotaro. Oh wait, I can lower my mask. Momotaro. Every night, Mama told me the story of Momotaro, the boy born from a split-open peach found floating down a river. He saved his entire village from a child-eating giant. The village monster hungered for the belly buttons of children, but because Momotaro was born from a peach and therefore had no belly button of his own, he was immune to the village monster and decapitated it easy with his sword. But Baba told Mama she wasn't allowed to tell me Japanese stories anymore. Remember, he said, what they did to our people and how my grandmother lost her left wrist and why I had to grow up wearing fiberglass sacks that sanded my skin and turned me hairless. So she no longer told the story to me. For a while, there was a girl next door named Momo. She lived in the front unit of a duplex, which meant she was Hoyalang, since only Hoyalang owned windows that faced the street, while the rest of us had a view of the alley that our brothers clogged, or of the empty lot where the stray dogs sometimes ate their babies. Every spring, the back unit kids bet which dogs would survive, which bitches would succeed their parents as the ass biters and butt chasers of our neighborhood. One year, animal control came and bagged up all the dogs, and then there were only possums, which also ate their babies, but no one wanted to bet on possums. That was the same year that Momo moved into the front unit with her mother and father and older brother. Mama said we should go find out what school she went to and what temple they prayed at, but Baba said they were Japanese and must not be spoken to or about. Their very presence, he said, was an omen. An omen of what? I asked him, but he said, shut up, we are not talking about them. They got a shiny tin mailbox. We didn't have mailboxes on this street since mail was usually just thrown at us, and because mail was usually bad. Bills, scams, letters from the dead, missing dog posters, cardboard Bibles. The idea that someone could want mail and that it needed to be housed in its own separate and roofed unit was strange to me, and so I watched from the street as Momo stood on her driveway and painted the mailbox pink. Because she lived in the front unit, she had forever access to the apricot tree on the driveway. Overhead, the branches clenched into fists. I walked up behind her and asked what she was doing. I meant it the way everyone here meant it. What are you doing? As in, stop doing that and go inside before I sandal you. Momo said that pink was her color. My name means peach, she told me. Yes, I said, I already know that. Momo, like Momotaro, the boy cut out of a peach, squeezed out like a seed. I didn't know that people could own colors, but the casual way she said it made me believe her, that pink belonged to her the way a cavity belonged to a tooth. After she finished painting the mailbox, she told me not to come near and smear it, and I said, what if a bird flies over and shits on it? I asked if she wanted to come play with us. With who, she said. Us, I said, meaning me and the street. Okay, she said, so I took her to the empty lot behind the duplex and showed her the hole in the fence you could shimmy through as long as you weren't a woman yet, with hips. That's what Mama always said to me, that someday I would acquire hips that would no longer allow me to trespass on certain territories. I didn't know how or where I would get hips, but I hoped they'd at least be free. Momo laughed at me. She pointed at herself and said, here, these are hips, everyone has them. But I didn't believe her, since she was able to snake in through the hole in the fence. The lot was full of dumped things. There was a sign on the fence that said, fine for dumping, but English had no authority here. And the dirt was mountained with mattresses, vacuum cleaner bags, bent bumpers, random glass, DVD cases, fistfuls of probably human hair. Momo skirted the fence and said this was all garbage, but I told her one time we found a bird cage here, and inside it, a live parakeet with peach-colored cheek feathers and a blonde beak. What did you do with it, she said. And I told her we bet on it. We bet how many days it would live without food or water. In the end, I said, some predator got it, a raccoon or a stray, and all that was left in the cage was a raw heart, small as a pinky tip, a throbbing garnet. Momo asked, why didn't you just let it go? You can't bet on something you set free, I said. I told her that's what we did here, bet on things, because our babas always told us that chance was the only thing that got us here and born, and that we needed to be attuned to all possibilities. Momo said, I don't have one of those, a baba, so I don't know about that. She squirmed through the hole in the fence and said her parents told her not to touch garbage or glass because it could hurt her. There was a game we played once, I told her, where we went barefoot in the lot and ran back and forth across it and then checked our souls afterward, counting how many shards of glass we'd mosaicked on our skins. Whoever bled the most would win. Whoever could pluck the glass out whole was going to be a future surgeon. Momo said she was going home. Standing on the other side of the fence, I couldn't see her whole. I could only see pieces of the light that the fence let through its fingers. She had a face like a peach, firm and furred, and I wondered what could brush against her life and bruise it. She had a face that was rinsed and sunned and set on a shelf to sweeten. Let me ask you something, I said, before you leave. Do you have a belly button? Momotaro didn't have one since he was born from a peach. You have parents, but maybe they sucked you clean out of peach meat too. Momo stared at me through the fence, and then she lifted her shirt and said, Here's mine. Her belly button was the lidded kind, and I was afraid it might blink at me, rolling a bone eye in its socket. I told her to come closer to the fence, to tuck a finger in, to prove it was real. It could be drawn on or stitched onto her stomach by her mother, a fake flap of pork fat. I remembered I had a cousin who used to play glassfoot with us, who told us that the way you get pregnant is through the belly button, that the best way to prevent pregnancy was to stitch it shut. We watched her squat on a rain-riddled mattress and thread the needle through the thinnest skin of her belly button, crimping the edges, knotting it off when she was done. It got infected later, and Mama had to slit open the threads with a pair of nail clippers. Look at mine, I told Momo, lifting the hem of my shirt. Mine's real, I said. My mother undid me here. Yours is fake, fruit-born. Momo said I was crazy. She said, my parents say I shouldn't be following you. Then she turned and ran from the fence. I saw the soles of her shoes speckled with bits of glass that dazzled the cement behind her, and I was proud of what I'd embedded in her step, what she carried without knowing. When her family left a few months later, Mama complained that they never talked to any of the neighbors, that they didn't even chip in for funerals, that they never even shared the apricots from their driveway tree, not even the hard ones or the dribbling rotten ones. It was only after they left that we resumed thieving from the tree, battering the branches with a bamboo broom, catching the apricots as gently as we could, cradling them in our mouths. They were sour to the stone, barely any meat on them, and none of them were big enough to bear babies. I thought that my mother's story was a lie, that there was no such thing as finding a free peach that floats along a river's spine, a boy waiting to be plucked from it. There was only ever a tree on someone else's property. We pursed open the fruit with our thumbs, saving the seeds to plant in the empty lot behind us, flicking them like shards of bottle glass, praying for the trees to grow up before the lot got bought. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for that, K-Ming. I'm such a fan. Thank you, Kundiman, for having me. As I said to Kyle last night, Kundiman has really changed my life. And thank you for welcoming me into your family, your service. It's really an honor to be here. Thank you, Kathy. Thank you, everybody. And thank you to all my fellow panelists today. For accessibility, I am 30-something, biracial, Chinese and Hawaiian woman. I'm wearing maroon glasses with a gold chain and a plaid shirt. I recently signed my next book. My first was, thank you. My first was a memoir. This next book is a novel, somehow a novel about a memoir. So I thought I'd read from it today for the first time to a live audience. I'm really nervous because it's been years since I've seen other people. So the book is this working still? Okay. The book is called Whidbey, and this is a few chapters in. The narrator here is a young Chinese-American woman named Bertie Chang. And she is on Whidbey Island, and she's recently found out that someone has written a memoir who is abused by the same person as she was, and has used her story in that memoir. I'd hidden the book in my suitcase in an additional zippered compartment meant for electronics. I knew Trace wouldn't look there, and so I'd kept it in the nylon slit ever since I brought the book home the day it was released, a few weeks ago now. The memoir was still in its paper bag with a pink receipt from the bookstore. I slipped it out of the paper, and it felt cold in my hands, all those pages heavier than I'd remembered. Lindsay's face in this cabin, all wrong, paradoxical, obscene. The paperback featured Lindsay's black and white face on its cover, her own cartoonish marble eyes peeking over her bare shoulder, who, me, humbled face and slightly scrunched brows. Above her head in bold, bulging letters, the title, My Turn, printed on red reflective foil. Then, across the skin of her shoulders, from victim to victor, one woman's journey. Newer copies on display at JFK were already being sold with golden New York Times bestseller stickers, though mine only had a few finger smudges. Quotes on the back read, "Groundbreaking, a feminist opus, more than your girl next door." I flipped the pages just as I'd done in the bookstore, looking for Calvin's name. Everyone from my therapist to my sort of friends had banned me from reading the book. Of course, I knew it was coming. Lindsay had been reaching out to me for years. "I promised to respect your time and boundaries," she'd said in her emails. "I would really love to talk. I think this could be healing for the both of us." Sometimes I pretended to remember Lindsay from school. I made up whole scenes, convinced myself of the way she wore her hair in braids and the way she dressed the Secret Garden 1993 lace collars, and that she changed her name from Lindsay to Lindsay with a Z to come off more interesting, not true, as proven by our yearbooks. But really, I didn't know. I didn't remember her at all. She had just begun high school when I graduated, and by then I didn't care to know anyone. If she came to my parents' restaurant, she likely looked and behaved like every other white person in South Florida. Years later, she appeared on only a few episodes of a reality dating show where she revealed her big truth, sobbing at the camera. She'd sent herself home unready for intimacy. "Lindsay King astonishes," another endorsement read. "Distantly related to Stephen," I bet she'd lied, constantly, conveniently, writing as in my blood. I never responded to her emails. Lindsay was allowed to use Calvin's real name because of court records and public domain, and this felt exploitative to me. Why couldn't she write her story as a fiction, like a novel or something, Trace had asked, impressively and loyally irritated, this when the book was first announced, when his name started appearing again. But the answer was simple. Lindsay was already on the Seth Meyers show. She was interviewed by Teen Vogue and Adult Vogue. Her beauty routine and daily eating rituals went around and around the internet. She was really taking off, no surprises. It was exactly what she'd wanted. Of course, she wrote a memoir. She needed everyone to know how exceptional she was for having endured any bad. She needed the world to see that white, beautiful women could suffer monumentally, excruciatingly so, and still hold on, keep it together, emerge survived. But Lindsay was 14, and I was 9, and I'd never needed an audience or stranger to name my suffering in order to know its volume and shape and realness. I could never, would never capitalize on it. I was a child. To me, there was a difference. Trace's face lit up my phone, a picture of her I'd taken under a tree in Central Park, her relaxed face. 12:30 a.m. in New York, 3 hours into the future, Trace had landed. Trace was calling. Trace would now stand up in her airplane aisle, twisting the little air knob off, hunched over and impatient, even though there's never any reason for her at 5'11" to stand while waiting for an entire plane to deboard. She'd snap some gum after a long plane nap, wind through the corridors and open-face restaurants of JFK, then wait, dazed and a little hungover already, for a taxi to drive her back to our place in Greenpoint. She'd direct the cabbie the whole way, get off before the Kosciuszko, stay in your middle lane, then have him drop her off a block or two from our apartment. She'd never let anyone know where we lived. Upstairs, she'd turn on all the lights, check the rooms, the closets, behind the shower curtain, under the bed, under the sink, then she'd check again. She'd shout, "I'm here if you're here, motherfucker," the whole coming home routine of women, announcing herself, exhausted. Trauma can be a family illness, our counselor had said, before suggesting Trace seek independent therapy as well. I'd hated that idea. I ignored her call. I'd tell Trace I fell asleep early, drained and gone after too much wine. For 8 years, we'd lived in inseparable simultaneity, but now she was on the other side of something, ahead of me, already a new day. That felt right. I fed the wood stove with some tissues and picked up the fire poker, testing its weight, its grip. I didn't bring a gun or bear spray or mace to Whidbey. There was, of course, no way to bring any of it. though Trace had packed me a switchblade and spiked keychain with individual holes for my fingers. The fire poker was so sooty it left dark marks on the wood floor as I played with it, a pen stabbed into palm. Fire tools, they would do. I brushed my teeth and slid on a second sweatshirt. Upstairs, I sat on the bed, dropped the book on my nightstand, then moved under the stretchy jersey covers in the dark. The buckwheat pillow crunched like a beanbag under my neck. I tucked the poker under the sheets with me, still warm from the stove. In the window, cut by banister, a crook of midnight so flooded by moon, it was as if I was right in the pith of the world. Maybe there would be a plan for me after all, a reason for Whidbey, a purpose, a tomorrow. Safety. Would I know it if I ever felt it? I pulled the chain of my bedside lamp, folded over Lindsay's face, and found the dedication page. For every girl out there who needs this, it read, you are never alone. Can you all hear me okay? Yeah. Okay. This room feels kind of like an anxiety dream. And anyway, I did nothing but read the book for days. If I slept, I didn't know it. If I dreamed only of the book. By the third read, I'd begun to memorize significant page numbers and passages, and by the fifth, I knew the book spatially, memorizing exactly where on a page certain moments played out or occurred. Left side, 2/3 down, after the paragraph break, page 34, that's where Lindsay did it. That's where her version of my story began. I'd thought the details of my charges were confidential, sealed. I didn't know where that paperwork lived or how legal confidentiality really worked, but I was a minor, an anonymous Jane Doe, when my parents pressed charges against Calvin. I couldn't even sign anything myself. My name brought up nothing on the internet. Trace and I had continued annually paying a company to wipe a digital footprint. I'd been so careful at removing myself from the world. So Lindsay must have hired someone, I guessed, to open those files, to snoop. The details, the statements and testimonies, the stories drawn from interviews I sat through, with so many rotating suits in my childhood living room, in the principal's office at school, at the police station, in an office building with palm trees planted inside, the pink cracked steps that led to it. Those stories and details had once been mine, memories that came alive in color and sound and dampness only when I let them in, secret passages, mine. Now they weren't. I hadn't even read my case files until they were right there, printed in her words, with her name on a book cover, her picture, her book. Sometimes I sat on the toilet with the book in my hands, feet and legs stinging a numb vibration. Whole days would pass like this, my awareness of time only coming to when I'd urinate every few hours, my ass bleeding drops into the toilet from sitting too long, my mind in the book, the details of my life, my spine aching. My entire life I've struggled with this, moving, simple movement. Long stretches of time passing before a flash of rope above me, of reality, usually my mother or Trace's snap. You've been staring for hours. You haven't left bed for days. You can't drive with this tendency. Do you think she's epileptic? And I do my best to catch the end of that rope flickering over my head, whipping so close from a mean wind, like a ladder let down, merciful and beating. And really everything bled in those early days with the book. My period turned on off schedule, my nose dried out and cracked from the wood stove, almost squeaky inside the nostrils, plastic ball pip dry, then blood, more blood. I suppose I bit my fingers, picked and ripped at them, though I was never conscious of this habit while doing it. Still, the pages went splotchy, comets of red that oxidized a dull brown. Tissue wads littered the floor with my nosebleed patterns, which I fed right back into the wood stove. Reading My Turn turned on tremors so severe I often couldn't steady my vision. My whole body clattered at it, then panged with muscle spasms. After every full read, I closed the book to stare again at the cover, looking Lindsay right in the eyes, expecting to find something new like she'd talked to me. The author photo of her inside the back cover showed a different Lindsay entirely. That Lindsay beaming an open-mouthed smile, her dyed cobalt black hair backlit by sun. She wore a burgundy sweater in this photo, and though no landscape was visible, there existed a distinct gold that suggested autumn. Like everyone survives in autumn, I thought. That was the message of this branding. Jade Suzuki, I'll call her, my section began. I will do my best to recreate Jade's story, to memorialize it and therefore offer her experience more dignity. It's a privilege I don't take lightly, to speak for those who can't speak, who've been left voiceless. You might know a Jade Suzuki yourself. Statistics say you probably do. Someone perhaps without the privilege of sharing. I left the cabin. Branches and soil snapped under my feet as I walked towards the beach. My skin cooled as snippets of my own words wound back to me, nausea running all the way down my arm and legs, sour stomach in my knees, and I tried to hum a song to push the words away. Then something slick underfoot. I crouched, bright gold slugs as long as fingers slid along the forest ground. I didn't see them move, but I know that they did. Even when I stared and stared, I saw no will outside the gummy twitch of their jelly antenna. Beautiful, I thought. Go, I thought, be alive. I stayed right there with them like it was the only thing to do. And next thing, maybe a moment later, maybe an hour, maybe more, the ground was wrapped in the cellophane their bodies left, dead leaves and earth under a canopy of translucence, slimed and shrunken without air, like a world perfectly packaged. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm 5'8", bald, and I wouldn't say that I have facial hair, but I'm poorly shaved. Wearing a red sweatshirt that commemorates Muhammad Ali and Joe Frazier in Manila. I want to read, I actually just decided this, so I'm sorry, but Electric Literature asked a bunch of Asian American writers to talk a little bit about the first book by another Asian American writer, and this is the essay that I wrote, and then I'll finish with a poem. This is about my cousin Ed. If I told you my cousin Ed, who drives a truck in Atlanta and doesn't read books, but texts me on every January 1st, Happy New Year, bro, God bless, would he count as an Asian American writer? When we were drunk one night on my mom's porch in New Jersey, and he told me the story of being back in Balaca, Ilocos Norte, and running out into the woods early in the morning with other children, racing each other to see who could find the most mushrooms just sprung up overnight, was he not, at that exact moment, an Asian American writer? Were we not both descended from the peoples of an archipelago at the edge of the Pacific, colonized by Spain and America? When Edmund tells me that during his early morning foraging, he once stopped short the instant he saw the familiar swell of dead leaves on the ground that shouted, "Mushroom right here!" And he joyfully plunged both his little hands into the earth to reap it. When he tells me he felt the soggy prize in his fingers before he smelled it. When he tells me that under the mound in the ground was no mushroom at all. When he says, it was a pile of shit. For someone had beat him to the spot and unloaded their bowels, covering the stink with mulch so it looked like a delicious fungus, but was really a load of human crap. Has he not composed a metaphor for the world to come? All of my earliest experiences of Asian American literature, all were oral. The stories emerged from rituals, formal and spontaneous. It meant that I was gathered with others. It meant I had a model not just for storytelling, but for listening and paying attention. Real people, ordinary people, complicated people. What I now read and what I make is informed by this rich, vigorous, and disappearing practice. Every Asian American book that I have loved, from Bulosan to Hagedorn to Gamalinda, has taught me the importance of preserving this. I shit you not. Thank you. And I'll just read the title poem from my new book. I was in the Philippines in 2009 when Typhoon Ondoy hit, actually. And the Fulbright, saved my life for probably a year and a half. For like the 4 months that I was in the Philippines, I didn't use all the Fulbright money. I brought it back to the United States so I could live on it. But while I was out there, I was already late in pay. Almost all my stuff was in a storage unit back here in Jersey, and I was already late paying for it. I crossed the ocean and I lost all my shit. I literally lost my shit. Couldn't pay for it. So that's the dramatic context for this poem. The last thing, or song from when they take it all away. They take the books, the crates of 80s 12-inch singles, a few dozen letters from Manila, LA, Seville. They take my stinky trash can and cracked plastic chair, the rickety plywood shelves, 11 photos of my mother leaving me with one. They take the dim shots of my brother's young faces beside mine. They take away the clean sheets folded among the soiled ones, the hand towels stained with fevers and shit, and official notices of all my debt stuffed in a box with 3 dead flies. Oh, and the tangled brush of a woman whom I've loved for 1 whole week, which, remembering her, makes me lift my hand as if to propose half a prayer, or to illustrate the best way to answer a dead king is to drop a fist on a hefty table in place of blasphemy's last syllable. They take it all from a cold, rented 5-foot space, and when I can't pay, they cross out my name, double shackle the gate, fill every proper form, and price the pitiful lot for the block. They call me to cough up over and over, say, explain yourself. Shame is like you're made of 10,000 beautiful doors, and every day you try to keep them all from flying open at once. They reach inside and take the boxes of shoes and old shirts, the third hand scratched up oak desk I heaved up 20 steps overlooking West Grand Ave with their battalion of metallic hands. They'll take away silence. They'll take away touch. They'll take music too, which is when I'll stand up alone and walk toward you and offer a few fingers for you to lead me to an empty floor and sway. They'll take the light. They'll confiscate my teeth and leave the knives with no handles. They take it all away. They take away weeping and take away laughter. Not last to go are the goats, as if I could forget the curses, and ha, they'll take my eyes, and they won't even eat them. They have taken so much. I am standing now somewhere at the end of a road which leads to a beach beside a sea that a million ghosts keep crossing, leaving everything I once had, everything I've become, everything electric in a muscle to make one minuscule move again toward the beautiful in that wacky wandering, in that bloody path, in that smoky inventory of a quarter century, in that ambling, in that sprint toward every gorgeous living thing, no matter how tortured, how peaceful. I am going. I am almost completely gone. I am stepping away. Watch me as I leave the forks. I leave the hammers. I leave the bones. I am left with love. I leave the boiled coins, the thin shells of swans. I am left with love. I leave the latches and bolts open. I am left again and again with love. I leave and I leave and I am left again and again, and I can't seem to shake it. The rage leaves me and leaves me again and again, and love is left. It is all that is ever left, and today I am blessed. I am the last thing burning. Thank you.
Thank you. Wow, what amazing readers. What amazing work. After spending time with all of your writings, it's like entering another dimension to hear it in person. So ancestral lineage is something that you've all talked about in your work. And I think for those of us who arise from the margins, who come from marginalized backgrounds, to consider oneself part of this lineage of literature is really a beautiful thing. So I grew up in rural Ontario, the only Asian family I knew. And the work that first influenced me was the poetic that could be seen across a range of genres, like Mei Bursenbrug, Badu Kapil, Teresa Hakyang Cha. And so I'd love to know, and I'd love for you to share with the audience, what is some of the, the first works, whether they're literature, music, or art, that first inspired all of you?
Yeah, I can go. I think for me, I love that you brought up oral storytelling, because it's so important in my family, and it's specifically among the women in my family. So I feel like what first inspired me to write was gossip, and it always began with, I'm not a gossip. I don't talk about other people's business. But, and then it's like 3 hours, and then it always ends with, but that's their business. We don't talk about that. And I love that ritual so much, and I still get phone calls from so many people being like, I don't gossip, but you have to know. And so I was a huge journal writer, diary writer as a kid. And I would often eavesdrop and write down all this gossip and also create kind of fake drama of my own that were just lies and rumors. And I feel like that irreverence towards storytelling was so important. There was always an element of reverence for these stories, but it was always people interrupting each other and saying, oh, that's not how you tell it. Here's the real version. That made me feel that storytelling was so porous and so full of possibility.
Yeah, I completely relate to that. I too grew up with stories of my family. In Hawaiian mythology is so important, and my mother was really interested in passing on these Hawaiian myths, but and I don't think she'll mind me saying so, she always got everything a little bit wrong. So also her flourishes, the mistakes she would make, the way that she would kind of get back on track, and things would kind of match up or not match up. What you said about lying or fibbing, it just opened this imaginative portal for me growing up. And just the simple stories that were told. I grew up in South Florida on a canal with gators, and for example, my mom was so scared as these gators were coming and snatching up little dogs that they would come get me, so she would make up these stories of the lake monster and who that was and where I should stay to protect me. So I think storytelling in general, I was also a child magician, and that for me always seems like a first version of storytelling, the idea of surprise, of cause and effect, and defamiliarization, of just transforming the object is something I still hold close.
Yeah. I mean, same. My tita Norma would show up after a long road trip from Canada. It would be like 2 in the morning when she would pull in, but I would hear her laughing so hard from the kitchen. My mom and dad were never up that late, but when Tita Norma arrived from Canada, it was like, and more than the story, I heard the laughter. And then, you know, a little bit later in life, it was also the weeping when we would lose people, like the specific kind of like the keening of my mother and my grandmother, which is actually an art form in the Ilocos. We call it dungao. You know, you kneel at the casket and you improvise this sort of gorgeous duende-filled song, really. And then, of course, you know, I grew up in hip hop, so it was like just talking shit on the street just because you had to hold your own, you know. And it's also how we kind of built intimacies, was kind of like, you know, cracking on each other a lot. And then all that, being a DJ during the turntablist era is like, that becomes the poetics out of which I can take all these different seemingly disparate traditions and say, there's a mode to be able to hold all this stuff.
Yeah, I think it's amazing to be able to trace all these convergences, right? Kind of our literary and ancestral DNA. Your poem, Patrick, you're talking about the mushrooms. So my dad also forced me to forage, you know, since I was a child. All of these things come back through our writing. So I'm wondering, was there a certain moment, you know, while you were growing up where you thought, you know, wow, this is possible for me. You know, I want to be a writer. Did you have one of those epiphany moments or something that drew you to that, where you are now?
I'm still waiting for that epiphany. Yeah, I guess for me, it wasn't so much just about like, oh, can I be a writer, but also what I was writing about. I was like, can I write about these stories that the women in my family have passed down to me? Is that allowed? Like, what kind of mythologies am I allowed to write about? And I think I was always seeking some form of like external permission. But what I realized is that I just had so much pleasure and desire in writing what I wanted to write. And that was going to happen no matter what, with or without an audience. And so I kind of tried to hold on to that pleasure and that joy of like writing into my desires. Yeah.
For me, I grew up as a letter writer. My tutu, my great-grandma, we had a Selectric, an IBM Selectric. It's still what I write on. I just dropped it off at Philly Typewriter for repair, actually, so if you need that, Philly Typewriters. But she was a letter writer, and she taught me how to set the margins. She taught me how to write a letter. And I started writing stories, letters that really became stories. And in terms of topic, what's interesting to me that I'm just now seeing is that the stories I'm writing now at 33 years old are the same stories I was writing then. Like, I tried so hard to get away from my life and get away from my stories for so long, and yet those first story arcs, those first missives, those first, like, the outreached hand for connection, my work is exactly the same. It's the same characters, it's the same purpose. And so I think we often find we come back to exactly where we started, but I started with letters.
Wow. I have to say that I wouldn't have used this language then, but I virtually considered myself illiterate growing up. Throughout high school, I went to this really good high school in New Jersey, St. Joe's. My freshman year, we had to read a book a week, which is like my grad students even.
Oh my God.
I would read these books, and I couldn't tell you anything about what had happened inside of those books. What I was studying was dance, breaking and DJing, and I had aspirations to be to be a composer and a jazz musician. And I was kind of on my way to doing that. And then my mom died. And it costs money, it takes time for you to become a musician. It requires you to have access to people. That was just not gonna happen to me at that period in my life. And one of the things that I've kind of come to understand is that Paul Ganega, this poetry professor at Bloomfield College where I was after I had flunked out of Rutgers numerous times, who was a poet, gave me an opportunity to do in language what I wanted to do in music. In some ways, and I don't mean this, as in a kind of, to sort of demean the role of poetry in my life, but poetry was a postponement of the music. It was a substitute, it was a surrogate. And 5 books in, I guess I wrote some poems, but I never left the music behind. I'm married now to a conservatory-trained coloratura soprano, and that has sort of heightened and deepened my immersion back into music, and just to my sort of like my making world where language really is just another sound, and my body's an extension of the instrument extension of my body. So I'm thinking more conceptually about writing as being a kind of contiguous and continuous with the original dreams of making music.
I love that. I love reading some of your, the intro for the last thing where you said that there's just this such a fluid boundary between storytelling and song, right? It's the word lyric. It comes from the Greek, lyra. So poetry was meant to be sung, right? And I can really hear that in your work, as well as, reading Tribe of Fatherless Girls, the letters, they're one of the most alive parts, in the entire novel. So those things that we keep from our childhood, I think they never leave us. And this poetry or this art that we do, it's our way of trying to say this unsayable, right? And I think that one of the most moving things in all of your work is how you write about the body. There's this quote by Canadian poet Erin Murray. She said, "Human struggle is always cited in human bodies, not bodies as signifiers, but bodies as lived apparatuses." And in this era that we live in now, media, the internet, it's one of these fractal, transient bodies, well curated, pixelated. But the body in all of your writings is this vessel to feeling, to empathy. And so I would love to know, I know K-Ming, she wrote in one that the body is a liability, right? Your book is about a tiger who wants to be a woman, a tiger spirit. Tikira wrote, "I want love the size of a fist, something I could hold, something hot-knuckled and alive." It's just such beautiful, raw writing about the body. So I don't know if you could talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, I'm so glad that you asked that question. To be Filipino, I don't really know how to say this except for the fact that to be a Filipino man and to have desire in America, that has literally been legislated out of the dream of America. We don't know this about our history. We were considered not just an economic threat because of the labor that we brought, but a sexual threat. That's why they didn't bring Filipino women over when America invaded the United States. And so literally, Filipino men were killed for being with white women. So you're talking about, this is a Filipino man's body. Filipino men don't even know, Filipino American men don't even know this history. Don't even understand how the way that they're being perceived has been shaped over this last 123 years. And so, you know, I guess it would be easy to just see my poems as like a poem by a guy, but I'm carrying this history, especially as a dude that like I'm not. You guys saw me on this mic. I'm not like some like even-keeled rational guy all the time, you know. So in other words, to be expressive, to articulate desire, has long been kind of a dangerous thing. And for us to sort of like, and I understand that there's a way that that's much easier for me now, but without being able to contextualize that ease in terms of the history, I think that's a dangerous thing. So I have to say too that this whole sort of like historical theory was not in my head, it was intuitive. It was like I understood that there are ways in which that I couldn't really speak or even express or show sensuality or desire. I was like, let's do it. So that's why I wrote.
You're tough to follow.
You know, I feel like we're all like in conversation in that way, though,
Yeah,
right?
absolutely, absolutely. I guess I'm always interested in, you know, the transformations of the body in literal and figurative, metaphorical ways, going back to those myths and like everyone is transforming into an animal, into an object, into a lehua flower, like everyone's transforming. So I guess that spot is what I'm looking for. And two, you know, just looking to language. I'm learning my native language of Hawaiian right now, and seeing the roots of words, and recently learning about the word grief and seeing that in grief is the place of rest for the body. Everything points back to that kind of the corporeal like transformation and the spiritual expansion and transformation too.
Yeah, that really resonates with me because sometimes I'll write a sentence with like 15 metaphors and 12 similes, and I want to keep all of them because I just think that transformative, visceral power of metaphor feels like a spell to me. And like writing a myth in a sentence, something is something else. It's so magical and embodied, and it's also funny that Tikira, you mentioned like writing the same stories as you did when you were little, because when I was 12, I wrote a novel on construction paper that was about a girl who transformed into a tiger, and it was kind of a ripoff of like 17 different young adult novels. Like they all had houses and they all went to this boarding school. But I think I've always been really fascinated, by bodily transformation, and I think finding power in a certain strangeness, and the fact similarly that myth, there is this feeling that anything is possible. Both structurally and in terms of transformation. And also I think my first dream as a person was, I was like, I want to be a dancer and tell stories through the body and embody language in that way. That was a very short-lived fantasy, but I think something about that still resonates with me, the embodiedness of language and the intimacy of that, and how I felt that whenever I was in a family setting, for example, and someone was telling a story, it was like, okay, now stand up and act it out. And like fall off the sofa, kind of dramatically acting it out. So there was a performative level to it as well that I found so transformative and transfixing too. Yeah.
Thank you. When I think about the body, it's also not just human corporeal body, like you said, right? But it's also like the body of the text, right? How can that be manipulated, plundered, disseminated across media into a variety of forms? And so all of you are writers who write across genres, and I'm really interested in this, the impulse between these various kinds of making. Maybe we'll start with you, Tikira. You said that you went to a writing residency, planning to write a novel, and then the memoir was what came out of it. And now you're going back to the novel form. Can you talk a little bit about these shifts?
Yeah, all my books are accidental, it seems.
That's great.
I studied fiction. Fiction was my interest. It's what I wanted to do. And I went to a residency. was emailed that I was on the wait list at my father's deathbed. And as soon as he died, I was accepted off the wait list. And I felt like, how could I go? But those close to me kind of pushed me to go and allow myself that place of rest and restoration. And I just couldn't engage with the fictional world in that time of grief. So I just started writing about my father, and I didn't know much about the memoir form, or I had these rules, I say in quotation marks, that I thought one had to follow to write compelling memoir or hero's journey, all these Western ideas that I grew up reading in school. And then I realized, wait, like my interest in surrealism, in myth-making, and fiction can actually be applied in this way too. I can write a memoir full of myths and full of telling a story and then retelling it in a new way. And that's actually something that I can bring to this form, bringing that magic, that transformation. And I had fun writing the only memoir I could write in that time, because grief is so nebulous. Grief is a myth. It's nebulous. It's like, it's a little magical. We have magical thinking, and I felt like my father was in the room with me half the time, and so I just let that all in instead of committing myself to a more traditional through line. And since then, I've been back to fiction. I always just kind of try to follow the heat of what's going on. When I try to push myself to work on something specific because I think I should, it's always the other thing that I'm putting off or writing on the side, which happens over and over again. And this was, my new novel is a story I was writing around that time, a short story that just kept talking and opening and getting longer and longer. And so finally, I put the newer projects aside to go back to that story, and now it's the new book. So I wouldn't say it's a deliberate decision. It's just following that heat, following the questions. After publishing a memoir, I was faced with the question of, like, what is that responsibility of storytelling about yourself, about others? And so that's something I wasn't finished exploring, I think, and that's why that new novel has those questions of storytelling and gaze.
Mm-hmm. And so it's like the work decides for us somehow,
Yeah.
you know. And you know, it was great to hear your essay, Patrick. And you know, you come from various fields as well. You know, I'd love to hear a little bit about your performance work, but also this shifting back between poetics, music.
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, going back to the 80s, if you belong to a crew, 90s, you got dancers, you have DJs, you have graffiti writers, you have the fashion. And while you might have some guys who are like better at one thing or the other, everybody's fluent in everybody else's practice. You all have conversations about it. And so that was essentially my training. And you learn how to do it together. It's like, you know, like writing, it's like, it's me and the page. It's not like that. Not like that if you're making a 5-turntable set and trying to make a whole dance. You can't do it alone. And so all those things of collaboration, of understanding different approaches and different media, that set a conceptual foundation that was invaluable to me as a writer. The idea of bringing together two fragments from completely different sources. And probably the most powerful thing, again, especially for us being writers of color, that our practice was not simply intellectual. Mm-hmm. That it was about feeling. It's about feeling something. About discovering something about what you actually feel through the process. So it was never in my mind, even when I was in an MFA program, that I'm a poet and that's all I'm going to do. In fact, the writers who I met who were Philippine born, Luis Francia, Eric Gamalinda, Jessica Jessica was born here, but the cadre of Filipino-born writers in America, they do everything. Journalists write poems, stories, plays. It's not unusual. All this like disciplinary like boundary, it's like building a house and there's rooms that you can't go into. And on top of that, there's somebody at the door telling you can't come in or you can't leave. Yeah, that's not how it was for me.
Yeah, it's great hearing about that. I came from a background of music and performance as well, and I think always it's this, the genre is not enough, right? It's somehow getting beyond this idea of disciplines, post-disciplinary thinking, and K-Ming, in bestiary, I just thought it was this amazing exercise of different forms, right? Epistolary form, fragmentary poetry, footnotes, modern myth making, and now I hear you have a short story collection coming out, and you're a poet, right? You have a chapbook with Black Lawrence. So how do you navigate all of these genres in your own creative process?
Yeah, I feel like I'm always like jumping through these like wormholes into other genres, because whatever I feel kind of like a beginner or an amateur in, I feel so liberated by that, because I don't have expectations of what I sound like in that genre or what I've written before in that genre. So I feel like I'm always maybe also kind of like escaping to side projects in that similar way. I feel like I'm escaping myself and my own voice all the time, which probably just leads me right back into it. But yeah, I didn't know that that was like hybrid genres. I thought, oh, well, I just like the language and I want to follow the sound of it, and kind of lead with metaphor and image. And whether that was in prose or in poetry, it felt the same, like speaking of feeling, it felt viscerally like a very similar process of accumulating language and accumulating imagery. Yeah, and in some ways too with prose, I felt even less precious about it in certain ways because I felt like I'm going to fill the space as much as possible. But yeah, I think in terms of the form of the novel and all the different genres it goes into, I think I also just absorbed a lot of found forms as well. Like I was taking an academic class and I was like, oh, what's in the footnotes of this textbook is more interesting than what's on the actual page, because there's so much doubt and self-questioning. Like, oh, we don't know if this fact is true. It was found on this ship, but we don't know. And I was like, oh, that's more interesting to me. Doubt and uncertainty and questioning the authority of the text to me was the most fascinating part of it. So I was like, oh, how can I embed a sense of doubt and uncertainty and not quite authority into the narrative voice?
Yeah, I love hearing about that. So we just have a few minutes left. So I had a question about language and how you've all reimagined language. But maybe would be helpful for the audience is for you to tell the audience, what could you tell an Asian American writer who is, looking or is inspired by your work? One message that you'd like to give, not to put you on the spot or anything. Oh no, I put everybody on the spot.
Ask Jaime. One thing.
I always go back to, probably heard it before, but just go back to your obsessions. Go back to the things you're obsessed with, the language you know. I think so many of us might be able to relate to growing up in spaces in which we didn't see ourselves or our communities or our interests reflected in pages we were given. And instead of trying to copy any of that or mirror any of that, like, what's the language you know? Is it jazz? Is it music? Is it magic? Is it oral storytelling? And just do that. Lean into that. We don't need permission to be playful, and just embrace the things that make us feel that heat on the page or as we're reading to a room, and just always follow that.
This is from an Instagram caption from an event that Zadie Smith did, and I screenshotted it because I felt very comforted by it. But I think her quote was, my paraphrasing is, you can't necessarily write the books that you want, but you write the books that you can. And maybe that sounds a bit like pessimistic, like you can't be the writer you want to be, but I felt very comforted by it, that you write what you can, and that is enough, and that is deeply important. And And I think that gave me permission to be like, okay, maybe I can't write this yet, or maybe I have this like idealized image in my mind of what I want to write, but this is what I can write in this moment, and this is what I want to write. And I felt very grounded and yeah, I felt very freed by that quote. Yeah.
So hard. Maybe that's what I'll say. Think I get, and I hope this isn't oversimplifying things, but I guess it would be, it's okay to be afraid. Might, fear is like, that's the door. That's the one that you have to open, It's like, we're always told to be strong, be courageous, da-da-da. That doesn't mean shit unless you actually acknowledge you're afraid. And then when you see that door that's labeled fear, you go to it, you knock on it. And then the demon's gonna answer, and then you say, what's your name? And he don't tell you his name at first, and you say, tell me your goddamn name. And then you might have to cook him a meal or something, but he's gonna tell you his name, and then he's gonna disappear, and then you're gonna step through that door. And then the fear's behind you.
Step through that door. That's beautiful. Thank you so much. Thank you to these three wonderful writers for being here today.